My name is George. When my wife tried to divorce me right after I inherited my late mother's fortune, she thought she was being smart. I had no idea that the woman I built my life with would turn on me the moment I was at my most vulnerable. She assumed she'd walk away with half of the inheritance. But she was wrong, and she was about to find out. I met Michelle 9 years ago. We were in our mid-20s, full of dreams and trying to figure out adulthood one step at a time. Our connection felt natural. The conversations flowed, the chemistry was there, and we both wanted the same things at the time. The first few years together were filled with those small, beautiful moments. I honestly thought I had found someone who would stand beside me no matter what life threw our way. But not everyone shared my excitement. The first time I introduced Michelle to my mom, I could tell she didn't like her that much. My mother wasn't rude or dismissive. In fact, she was as polite as always. But after Michelle left that day, my mom sat me down and said something I've never forgotten. She said, "I know you're in love, George, but time will decide how well this goes." She looked at me like a mother who'd seen enough of the world to spot things her son couldn't. She wasn't accusing Michelle of anything. She made something clear by saying, "I don't hate her, but you're my only child, and I need you to move with your eyes open." That conversation stuck with me, but at the time I saw it as just a motherly concern. I thought she was being overly protective. I took her advice, in part, and didn't rush into marriage. Michelle and I dated for a few years before tying the knot. And when we finally got married, I thought we were ready. But looking back now, I realized my mother picked up on something that I, in all my infatuation, missed. Even after we got married, the relationship between Michelle and my mom stayed the same, cordial, but cold. There was never any blow-up or argument, just distance. My mother remained polite, but reserved. The kind of reserve that tells you she's watching everything, but won't say more unless she has to. She never tried to interfere in our marriage. She respected my decisions, even if she didn't agree with them. But she never got close to Michelle, either. There were no long chats over tea or bonding moments between them. At the time, I told myself that was normal. Not everyone becomes best friends with their in-laws. I figured as long as they weren't hostile, it was fine. The first few years of our marriage were mostly steady. There were the usual ups and downs, learning to live together, adjusting to each other's habits, figuring out how to build a life side by side. We had our arguments like any couple, sure, but nothing major. I had spent years working a steady job in the corporate world. It was safe, but it wasn't fulfilling. I had this itch to create something for myself, to stop trading hours for someone else's dream. So, 2 years into the marriage, I made the jump. I left my job to start my own agency. It wasn't a reckless move because I had done my homework. I saved up. I built a small team. For a while, things were okay. But then, one of my employees messed up badly on a major project. This was a complete disaster. We lost not one, but our two biggest clients. They pulled out immediately, and the agency's lifeline was cut off. Those two clients made up more than half of our revenue, and when they left, it felt like someone yanked the floor from beneath my feet. I tried to stay calm and rebuild. I reached out to potential new clients. I updated our pitch deck. I chased every lead I could find, but none of them came close to filling the gap. The agency went into what I can only describe as limp mode. We were still technically running, but without enough income to keep us afloat. Every week, I watched our balance dip lower. Every night, I went to bed knowing the numbers didn't add up anymore. After 2 months of trying to hold it together, the stress started leaking into our home life. The bills didn't pause. The groceries didn't buy themselves. I did my best to keep the house running, but it wasn't enough, and Michelle wasn't having it. The patience I thought she had has vanished. She started getting cold, angry, and bitter. I hoped she would step up just a little while I tried to turn things around. I wasn't asking her to carry the weight forever, just for a while, but instead of supporting me, she turned every day into a fight. Even when she did help with money, she made sure I heard about it, loudly. She complained sometimes for hours about how I had left a perfectly good job to chase a business that was collapsing in real time. And to be fair, I understood where the frustration was coming from. But what hurt most was how quickly she started pointing fingers, like none of this affected both of us. Like I had somehow dragged her into a mess just to watch her suffer in it. It wasn't just the money that created the cracks. The truth is, things between us had already been shifting. We had hit a rough patch even before all this financial pressure showed up. But once the money issues came in, those cracks widened into gaps we could barely look across. We stopped communicating. The warmth disappeared. We weren't partners anymore. We were roommates. At some point, I realized I was running out of options. I had been trying to keep the business afloat on my own, scraping through every week and hoping for some sort of miracle. I didn't want to ask anyone for help, especially not my mother. I mean, she had already done so much for me throughout my life. But pride doesn't pay bills. And watching everything I built slowly fall apart, that kind of pressure changes your perspective real quick. So, one evening, I drove over to my mom's house. I told her everything: how the agency was sinking, how I had lost my top clients, how I had tried to fix it quietly, but I couldn't pull it off alone. I thought maybe she'd be disappointed or give me one of her "you should have known better" talks. But she didn't. She listened, nodded slowly, and after a few seconds of silence, she stood up, walked over to her drawer, pulled out a folder, and said, "Take this. It should cover what you need to get back on your feet." She gave me enough to restructure things, to hire temporary consultants, revamp our proposals, and get our systems running again. It wasn't a magic fix, but it gave me breathing room. And in the next few months, things did get a little better. I brought in a few new clients. They weren't as big as the ones I lost, but they helped stabilize the cash flow. I stopped waking up in cold sweats, thinking the office would shut down next week. I felt like I could finally breathe again. But while the business was healing slowly, the marriage wasn't. That was the hard part. You'd think the financial relief would ease the tension between us. But instead, it just exposed how far we drifted from each other. Michelle and I barely talked. When we did, it was surface level. We weren't spending time together, not because of work schedules, but because we stopped making an effort. We'd eat in the same room, but barely make eye contact. We slept in the same bed, but felt like strangers. I try sometimes, but it always ended with one-word answers or silence. We both knew something was breaking, but neither of us wanted to say it out loud. So we just lived like that for months. One evening, out of the blue, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was soft, but there was a seriousness in her tone I hadn't heard before. She asked if I could come see her the next day. I knew something wasn't right. The next day, I drove over to her place, thinking maybe she just needed help with something around the house. But when I sat down, the look on her face told me this wasn't about leaky taps or groceries. She told me that she had ovarian cancer, not just recently diagnosed. She had been living with it for nearly a year. It was already late stage. The treatments she'd been doing weren't working the way she hoped. Her doctors told her it was time to stop thinking in terms of years and start thinking in terms of months. That moment shattered me. I sat there completely still, trying to process it. But everything felt like a blur. My mother was my rock. Ever since my father passed away 12 years ago, she had been the one constant in my life. Hearing that I was going to lose her, it was like hearing that the ground beneath me was about to crack wide open. I remember just sitting there, looking at her hands, thinking how many times those hands had held mine when life got rough. And now I was the one being told to prepare to let go. The weeks that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. I tried to keep my agency running, tried to keep my head above water professionally, but my heart wasn't in it. I was either at the hospital, sitting by her side, or mentally stuck in that hospital room even when I wasn't physically there. Watching someone you love slowly fade away is not something you can describe properly. I would sit there and hold her hand, sometimes in silence, sometimes talking about nothing, because I didn't know how to talk about goodbye. I told Michelle what was going on, and at first, she reacted with sympathy. She said all the right things. But as time went on, I started noticing how little she was actually showing up. She visited the hospital a few times, but not often. When I asked, she'd say work was overwhelming or that she found hospitals depressing. I didn't press her. Truth be told, I'd already accepted that she and my mother never had a close relationship. They were cordial, polite even, but there was never that real warmth. So I stopped expecting more. I didn't want to fight, while I was already drowning emotionally. 2 months. That's how long my mom stayed in the hospital before her body gave up. 2 months of watching the strongest woman I know slowly lose her strength. And when she finally passed, even though I had seen it coming, I still wasn't ready. She had always told me that when her time came, she didn't want fanfare. She didn't want people flying in or making speeches. She wanted to be buried quietly, without delay. So I made sure that's exactly what happened. I buried her the next day, just like she asked. I took care of everything: the funeral home, documents, the service. I remember standing by her grave, listening to the pastor speak, and thinking, how do you keep going when the person who taught you how to survive is no longer here to guide you? That was the beginning of a very dark season in my life. One I thought I'd be facing with my wife by my side. but I would learn soon enough she had a different plan. A week after I buried my mother, I got a call that caught me off guard. It was from her lawyer. He asked if I could come by the office whenever I had a moment. I set the appointment for the next afternoon. Now, walking into that office felt heavy. I hadn't even begun to adjust to the fact that I couldn't just pick up the phone and hear my mother's voice. I expected the meeting to be about paperwork, maybe to sign off on funeral costs or close her accounts. The lawyer pulled out a thick file. He told me that before her health got worse, my mother had restructured her finances. She didn't just leave behind money. She placed everything into a trust. I sat there quietly while he explained what that meant, because truthfully, I had no clue. He broke it down for me in plain language. A trust is like a locked box that holds someone's money or assets, but only certain people can access it, and only under specific conditions. I was the only person listed in the trust. There were no other beneficiaries. Everything she had was all in there for me. But it wasn't money I could just grab the next day. She set it up with clauses that showed just how much thought she put into protecting me, even after she was gone. The most important clause said I couldn't access the full amount until after a 3-year stability period. That meant I had to wait 3 years, during which my life had to remain steady. No big personal disasters, especially no divorce. On top of that, if I ever got divorced during those 3 years, or if I was even in the middle of a divorce, my spouse would be completely cut off from ever touching a kobo of that trust. Not a cent, not indirectly, not through the courts, not even through negotiation. The money was shielded completely from marital property loss. I remember sitting there with a folder in my hands, just staring at it. My first reaction was confusion. I kept wondering why my mother would go to these lengths. Did she not trust Michelle? Did she not trust me? Was this her being too careful? Or did she see something in Michelle that I had ignored? But the truth is, my mother had always been private and careful. She never told me how much she was worth, never showed off, never bragged. She just lived quietly, and apparently planned quietly too. I didn't question her choices. Part of me knew deep down that she just wanted to be sure I was protected, no matter what happened. I left the office that day in a fog. I told Michelle that I'd met with the lawyer, and that my mom left me an inheritance. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't talk about the waiting period or the clauses. I figured it wasn't the time, and honestly, I didn't think it would matter. When I told her about the inheritance, she barely looked up from her phone. All she said was, "Your mom was so organized." Maybe she didn't know what to say, or was trying to be careful not to seem greedy. But now I know better. Her reaction was calculated. She was already thinking ahead. I just didn't know it yet. 2 weeks after I told my wife, Michelle, that my mom had left me an inheritance, I got served on a regular workday. I was at the office, in the middle of reviewing reports, when a man walked in and asked for me by name. He was a process server. He handed me a sealed envelope and said, "You've been served." When I opened the envelope, I felt like the floor dropped beneath me. It was a notice of petition for dissolution of marriage. In plain terms, Michelle was filing for divorce. The stated reason was irreconcilable differences. I just sat there for a minute, stunned. Sure, we hadn't been perfect lately. Our communication had dropped, and things between us weren't like they used to be. But we hadn't even argued recently. There were no warning signs, no "we need to talk" conversation. Just that letter. When I got home that evening, I walked straight to her and asked, "Why? Why are you divorcing me?" without even trying to talk to me first. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look at me properly. She just said, "We've grown apart. Let's be adults about it." Then she walked away, like she had already made peace with whatever she had planned. I didn't even know how to react. I stood there, feeling like I was speaking to a stranger. From there, the divorce process started to drag on for months. It was slow, it was draining, and it felt like being stuck in a storm that wouldn't end. During mediation, Michelle came in swinging. Her lawyer confidently demanded 50%, half of all present and future marital assets. The key words there, future assets. She assumed that included the inheritance from my mom. I hadn't told her the fine details of how it worked, because frankly, I didn't think I needed to. I never even touched the money yet. Everything was still locked away in a trust, just as my mother had arranged before she passed. What Michelle didn't know, and what her lawyer apparently didn't bother to verify, was that my mom had put very strict conditions around the inheritance. And if I were in the middle of a divorce during that period, my spouse was completely cut out. During one of the mediation sessions, the trust's legal structure finally came up. My lawyer brought in the documentation and explained it. He laid it all out: how the inheritance wasn't part of the marital estate, how it had never been deposited into our shared accounts, and how it was legally protected by those clauses. I'll never forget the look on Michelle's face when it hit her. She looked like someone had pulled the rug right from under her feet. Her lawyer glanced through the document, flipped back and forth, and finally leaned back in his chair and muttered, "We should reconsider our position." You could tell he was stunned, too. He thought they had a solid claim, but they had no leg to stand on. She had made her move way too early, and with the wrong assumptions. Her plan, if you can even call it that, backfired right in her face. In the end, the divorce went through. But without any access to the inheritance, Michelle only got what was available from our actual shared marital assets. And trust me, there wasn't much left by then. The settlement she received didn't even come close to what she thought she was walking away with. In fact, most of it was swallowed by her legal fees. But still, she wasn't happy. After the settlement, she lashed out, called me selfish, said I was evil, said I planned everything with my mom to screw her over. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't hold back. I told her straight. When I first sat with the lawyer and heard all the clauses in the trust, I thought my mom went too far. I really did. But after seeing what you pulled off here, I get it now. She knew exactly what you were capable of. She saw something in you I refused to see. And she protected me from it. That was the last real conversation we had. The divorce was finalized about a year after it all began. She went her way. I went mine. But it didn't end there. Some months after the divorce was finalized, Michelle reached out to me again. It came as a message late one evening. Just a direct confession. She was drowning in debt, and now it was all crashing down on her at once. She said she didn't know who else to turn to. She said she felt stuck. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that old instinct tug at me. The part of me that once would have moved mountains to help her. But I didn't. I took a deep breath and replied, "I'm sorry you're going through this, Michelle, but I can't save you. I truly wish you well." I just left it at that. Because here's the truth. When someone shows you who they are, especially at your lowest, you believe them. And when they try to cash in on your grief, you don't go back and hand them another chance to do it again. That was the last time we ever spoke. Looking back, I feel grateful for the warning signs, for the heartbreak that opened my eyes, and even for the silence that came after. I won't lie and say it didn't hurt. It did. I lost my mother and my marriage in the same season of life. That kind of pain changes a person, but it also wakes you up. Thanks for listening.